We're starting with a big ugh. Pressure is growing on President Trump's labor secretary to step down over the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Democrats are blasting Alex Acosta for a secret and generous plea deal he approved for the financier more than a decade ago when Acosta was U.S. attorney in Florida.
Epstein served 13 months in jail and was often released during the day after being accused of sexually abusing dozens of underage girls. He had to register as a sex offender. Epstein now faces federal child sex trafficking charges in New York City, where prosecutors say a raid of his home turned up hundreds of lewd photos. Ben Tracy is at the White House. Ben, is Secretary Acosta's job on the line?
Well, Acosta serves at the pleasure of the president, and so far the president is standing by him. But Mr. Trump, who has his own history with Jeffrey Epstein, is giving himself plenty of room to maneuver if he decides Secretary Acosta has to go.
I feel very badly, actually, for Secretary Acosta, because I've known him as being somebody that works so hard and has done such a good job.
On Tuesday, President Trump defended his cabinet secretary, while also saying he believes many judges and attorneys wish they could have handled things differently years after the fact.
I would think you'd probably find that they would wish they maybe did it a different way.
That's because of a 2008 plea deal Acosta signed off on when he was a U.S. attorney in Miami. Epstein was tried in state court, where he was given a 13-month sentence that even allowed him to leave jail and go to work 6 days a week. Acosta made an agreement with Epstein's attorneys to keep the plea deal secret from Epstein's victims. Epstein was also granted immunity from federal charges. A Florida judge ruled Tuesday that prosecutors violated the law by not consulting Epstein's victims about the plea deal.
Acosta perverted justice to give a very sweet deal to an accused multiple child molester, and there's no business in government.
Many Democrats, including those running for president, are now calling for Acosta's resignation. He defended himself on Twitter Tuesday, saying, with the evidence available more than a decade ago, federal prosecutors insisted that Epstein go to jail, register as a sex offender, and put the world on notice that he was a sexual predator. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says Acosta's fate is up to the president, and the focus should be on Epstein's crimes.
There's no question that the accusations against Epstein are horrendous.
The billionaire financier was once friendly with Mr. Trump, who sometimes socialized with Epstein at his Mar-a-Lago club in Florida.
I knew him like everybody in Palm Beach knew him.
In a 2002 article, Mr. Trump said, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." On Tuesday, the president said something different.
I was not a fan of his. That I can tell you. I was not a fan of his.
The president now says that he had a falling out with Jeffrey Epstein about 15 years ago, but he won't say why. Meanwhile, the author James Patterson, who has written about Epstein, says that Mr. Trump kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago after there were some complaints about his behavior with young women, but the White House will not confirm that. Tony?
All right, Ben, thank you very much. Alan Dershowitz, one of Epstein's former lawyers, is talking about the new charges and more in his first TV interview since Epstein's indictment. Dershowitz defended Epstein against sex abuse allegations in Florida more than a decade ago. One of Epstein's accusers now, Virginia Roberts Giuffre, claims she was forced to have sex with Dershowitz as part of Epstein's alleged sex trafficking operation. Dershowitz says Giuffre and her lawyer, David Boies, falsely accused him as part of an elaborate extortion scheme. Giuffre is now suing him for defamation. Mola Lenghi spoke to Dershowitz last night at his New York City apartment. That would be Dershowitz's apartment, not Mola's. Mola, what did Alan have to say?
Well, good morning, Tony. Yeah, Alan Dershowitz vehemently denies the allegations brought against him by Virginia Giuffre. He says he had no idea about the extent of the allegations against Jeffrey Epstein when he took on his case back in 2008. But he says defending controversial clients is just part of the job.
Did you ever see Mr. Epstein with underage girls?
No. Oh, no. If I had ever seen Jeffrey Epstein in any inappropriate situation with an underage girl, I would have terminated my relationship and turned him in. No way.
So you're obviously surprised by the allegations.
We were shocked by the allegations, but as a criminal lawyer, being shocked by an allegation doesn't mean that I won't defend somebody.
Alan Dershowitz helped negotiate what many have criticized as a lenient plea deal for Jeffrey Epstein in 2008. Dershowitz denies the deal was a bargain, instead arguing prosecutors lacked the evidence to indict Epstein for federal sex trafficking charges.
They thought they would lose, so they
made
cut
a
this deal.
And for them, it was not a bad deal. They got him to be a registered sex offender, to pay vast amounts of money to all of the women, and to get him to plead and go to jail and expose him for the world to see as a sex offender. I think the feds thought it was the best they could do.
An in-depth investigation by the Miami Herald in November uncovered police records alleging Epstein molested dozens of underage girls. One detective told the paper the evidence supporting the girls' claims was overwhelming.
Obviously, there's a lot of talk about this being a result of Mr. Epstein's wealth and power. Do you think anyone else would have gotten this sort of deal?
Oh, I think a lot of people without the power and wealth might have gotten a better deal. His prominence, his fame, made it clear that the prosecution would work very hard to get the best possible deal they could. Look, wealth is a two-edged sword. It helps you put together a very good legal team, but it also puts you in the public eye in a way that makes the prosecution work very hard.
But this deal was kept very much under the wraps.
I had nothing to do with that part of it.
But legal, ethical, you'd go back and make the same deal and you think it was all squared away?
I would try to get a better deal. The job of a criminal defense attorney is to try to get the best possible deal.
Part of the immunity deal left open the avenue for civil charges to be brought up against Mr. Epstein. Any idea how many civil cases have been brought against him, how much money has been paid out?
I wasn't involved at all in the financial aspects of it. I'm a criminal lawyer, not a civil lawyer, but from what I know, tens of millions of dollars were paid out to many, many alleged victims.
Dershowitz is seeking to throw out a defamation lawsuit brought against him by Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who accuses him of participating in Epstein's alleged sex trafficking ring. Dershowitz says he has proof Giuffre is lying.
The same woman that accused me claimed to have had dinner with Bill Clinton and two underage girls on Jeffrey Epstein's island, claimed to have met Al Gore and Tipper Gore's Secret Service records show that all of that is fantasy and made up. This is a woman with a long, long record of lying for money.
Overnight, Virginia Giuffre, the woman accusing Alan Dershowitz, filed opposition papers disputing Dershowitz's motion to dismiss her lawsuit. Giuffre's attorneys say that Dershowitz is intentionally lying to discredit her and to intimidate her into silence.
Mola, thank you very much. Dershowitz is also saying that these are politically motivated charges against him.
We should remind people that a court has determined that that plea deal was illegal, in part because the victims were never notified about it.
I'm also curious about his definition of a better deal, because what we're hearing seems like a pretty good deal.
It's also noteworthy that Dershowitz is talking about weak evidence, but not about an innocent client.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
All right, in our next hour, an attorney for more than a dozen of Epstein's accusers responds to Alan Dershowitz's comments and the new charges in the case. We're going to begin here. President Trump is backing his labor secretary, Alex Acosta, who faces demands to resign for negotiating a secret 2008 plea deal for Jeffrey Epstein. Acosta tweeted yesterday he supports the new charges against Epstein. He said based on the evidence available then, the feds insisted Epstein go to jail and register as a sex offender. Critics call it a sweetheart deal, shielding Epstein from federal charges of sexually abusing underage girls.
In his first TV interview since the new charges were filed, former Epstein defense lawyer, that's Alan Dershowitz, defended the deal that he helped negotiate. He told our Mola Lenghi it was smart to have Epstein plead guilty to state charges.
They had a very strong state case because most of the alleged victims were local kids from Palm Beach, but there was no transportation and interstate commerce, and I think the feds thought they would lose.
So obviously, there's a lot of talk about, this being a result of Mr. Epstein's wealth and power. Do you think anyone else would have gotten this sort of deal?
Oh, I think a lot of people without the power and wealth might have gotten a better deal. That is, his prominence, his fame, made it clear that the prosecution would work very hard to get the best possible deal they could.
Attorney Brad Edwards has represented 13 women who accuse Epstein of abusing them. 12 say they were underage at the time. He's been on their side for more than 11 years, from before Epstein's plea deal with now Secretary Acosta. Brad Edwards, good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
The federal government prepared a 53-page indictment against Epstein back 10 years ago, 11 years ago. But you just heard Alan Dershowitz say they thought they were going to lose the case. Is he right?
He's wrong. He knows he's wrong. The federal government had a very strong case. They had identified more than 30, about 34 underage victims. The evidence was overwhelmingly strong.
So why did they walk away from that indictment?
That's still what we want to know. So they went from, in May of 2007, they have a 53-page indictment. Literally 2 months later, there is the exchange of a non-prosecution agreement between Epstein's lawyers and the government. And our biggest problem was the victims were not told anything about it. They're cooperating with the federal government. They believe there's an investigation going on. And meanwhile, behind their backs, there's a secret deal happening between the government and Epstein. That's what was wrong.
That's so stunning, too, Brad, to hear that. You can't imagine what the victims are thinking. Well, you can imagine that. Does Alex Acosta have some explaining to do? Have you ever tried to reach out and get a conversation with him during all this time?
Well, he has a lot of explaining to do. We filed a case back in 2008 against the federal government under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, simply saying crime victims have basic fundamental rights to be heard at a hearing, to confer with the government, to be treated with fairness. I've reached out to Mr. Acosta numerous times, formally and informally, saying, just sit down with us and explain why.
How many times has he talked to you?
Never.
He's never talked to you.
Still right now, even going on television and sending out tweets, it's not helping anything. Just sit down.
So he doesn't even say no comment? He just gives you no response? Nothing?
No response.
I was struck by the fact that in his statement on Twitter yesterday, Acosta said that Epstein's crimes are horrific. Not alleged crimes. Crimes are horrific, suggesting he had some sense that he was guilty at the time or is guilty after the fact. My question is, this settlement, this plea deal, was approved by the Justice Department at the time. Doesn't that give him some cover here?
The
deep sigh there.
Yeah, well, that's because he approved the plea deal. What the Justice Department approved was that he, Alex Acosta, could prosecute him.
Yeah.
That's what they said. You can prosecute him federally. And then Alex Acosta chose not to prosecute him federally. That's just really what happened.
This plea deal was ruled illegal by a court this year. Why is it still in effect?
We filed that case 11 years ago and fought for 11 years, and a federal judge has finally ruled in our favor. Yes, the federal government violated the victims' rights. Now, what do we do about it? We say it's pretty simple. It's an illegal agreement between Jeffrey Epstein on the one hand, the government on the other. In violation of victims' rights, you invalidate the agreement.
But that hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened yet. I would say in the next 6 months, we're going to have a ruling on that. And I expect it to go in our favor. It just makes common logic.
Have other victims come forward since this story is now back in the news?
Just in the last 48 hours, we've heard from new victims. And one of the main reasons my clients came up for the hearing, who we still don't know who in the new indictment, who the victims are. But my client, they wanted to be at the hearing. They were at the hearing. And it was mainly so that they can say, if there are new victims, not only victims, or witnesses that have any information, call us.
What is justice like? What would justice look like for your victims? Is it enough that he is behind bars?
There's relief there.
By your count, how many victims are there?
Well in excess of 50.
Wow, that's a big number. Here's another question, though. Are there going to be additional high-profile names attached to this? We have Epstein, a lot of people in Epstein's orbit at the time. Did they participate?
I have personally investigated this for 11 years and don't know of any high-profile person that would be implicated. There are plenty of people that ran in his... Exactly. There are plenty of people that ran in his circles who have information, and that's one of the things. If you have information, you observed anything, you heard anything, come and let us know. Just tell us what you know at this point.
Well, many of the high-profile victims are saying they don't know nothing about nothing and are now running for the hills, who allegedly knew him very well.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
But you're saying, how could you not know, considering his behavior?
Well, he wasn't hiding his behavior.
Yeah.
If you look at the evidence, he's doing it every day, wherever he is, and it's not in secret. He had employees that their only job was to recruit girls for
young
him.
women.
All right, not the end of the story, but the end of this conversation. Brad Edwards, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
The CDC